guys know me, you'll know that I tend to like to talk about some things like Taylor Swift or whale watching or photography, but today I'm going to be talking about accreditation, I promise. This is my last Taylor Swift reference, and hopefully I won't cry. Anyhow, I have worked for the NEIC. My name's Sarah Franson. I've worked at the NEIC for 23 years now. I will say when I first started at the NEIC, I heard accreditation, but I actually had no idea what it was. I just thought it meant traveling because everyone that worked for the program seemed to travel a lot. But then I had the opportunity to move over to the accreditation unit and really learned what it was. And just essentially high level, it's just a set of baseline minimum standards that we ask all of the states to meet. And we've got guidelines that cover everything from analysis to exams to troubled companies to even starting up a new company and the processes that should be followed from there. But today, before we really get started, I'd like to first start with the fact that we are joined by, I think initially on the slides, if you have the old ones, we were supposed to be joined by Commissioner Stolpe from Oregon. He got what they call the back to school bug. So unfortunately, he could not make it. But I am joined still today with Commissioner Clark from Kentucky and Director Dwyer from Rhode Island. And I'd like to, do you have any opening thoughts? Just hi.
We're just thrilled to be here.
So I have actually had the opportunity to work with both of them throughout my time in accreditation from actually some of my very first full reviews. And I would like to kind of start by advancing the slide. Like to start by asking some of their perspectives, especially Director Dwyer. I think you've probably worked with some notorious people, I guess you could say, when it comes to accreditation. So she's got a lot of, I think, more direct state knowledge when it comes to the accreditation program. So I'd like to ask her first, like her historical perspective on that.
Sure, thanks a lot, Sharon. I started with the Rhode Island Department in 2000, so I beat you by a year, 24 years. But I am an attorney, so I was not in financial, but our superintendent at the time was the former chief examiner. So we were very focused, we still are very focused on financial solvency. And I would consult with him. He was chair of the F Committee Accreditation, he was chair of the Financial Condition Committee. So notwithstanding the fact that I was a lawyer, I was very involved. But when I started, we had already been accredited in Rhode Island. I think we got it maybe 96. And I would hear the stories. So the stories were, in the 80s and 90s, and this was at a time when the threat of federal the feds taking over insurance regulation was really very strong. But what they tell me is you would have 5 states in a company doing 5 financial exams, none of them sharing any information, the results being different. They might be for different periods. There was just really nothing coordinated. And then you might have another company that nobody was in. So you didn't have any overall analysis of who's doing what. And so what they came up with was what we currently have, which is our domestic deference program. So as you know, if you are a domestic state, you do the financial, and now we have financial analysis and financial examination. You do it, and everyone relies on you. So how can we make sure that, Sharon's state, that I can rely on Sharon for her domestic company and allow them to write in my state? That's what the accreditation program is. It's the standards that we agree to that we're all going to follow. And my predecessor tells me that the 2 things were happening at the same time. The accreditation program was being developed and the standards were being developed. So when he started in the mid-'80s, he said statutory accounting was like a pamphlet. Very little information. It was really just your general GAAP accounting. And any of you that have been deeply involved in statutory accounting know that there's real good reasons that we changed the GAAP standards. The real good reasons. So, you were just following that, and then you had a couple of changes, and they weren't very specific. So that was being developed at the same time the accreditation program and the domestic deference was being developed. And sometime around the mid-'90s is when it all kind of gelled together. But one of the things I think is great about the program is we don't stop there. It's a constant rethought of all different standards as they happen, always with the goal of keeping companies solvent and keeping the industry healthy.
Well, I have to stop and think. Kentucky is having its accreditation next year, and they do them every 5 years. This will be my 4th, so those math majors out there can tell that I've been around a while, to go through this. And during my first tenure, accreditation, to me, was walking in this big room, and it was kind of scary. And you had all your peers sitting in a U-shaped table, and you're in a spotlight. It's kind of like going for the Wizard of Oz, at this point. And I didn't really know what to expect, other than I had faith and I had trust in the folks back home. And I knew what the work that they did. So during my second tenure, I've become much more involved with accreditation. And I've learned so much more. I'm serving as vice chair of the EP committee, and it has been a more clear understanding of the trials, the tribulations that we're all facing now. But it is a mission that everyone is attaining and wants to attain. And what does that mean? And I guess I'm probably getting off our questions here. I can go before my Kentucky legislature, and if I have a piece of legislation that has to do with accreditation, they might not understand all of that technical language in the bill, but they realize that that means something for Kentucky to be accredited. And it means something not just for the state, but it means something for the entire process of state-based regulation. So the accreditation, again, I go before and they'll say, it has to do with alien companies, and I'll have a legislator say, how does that different, where are these people from, and all of this. They don't understand it. But again, they understand that accreditation is critical to what we do.
Yeah, that's actually great segue into the next topic. Speaking of what accreditation is versus what it's not. And I remember reading once an article on the insurance financial industry, and they actually said the words that the accreditation program is like the holy grail of financial regulation. And the holy grail seems like it might be something pretty significant if you're referring to that. We often refer to it more as the cornerstone of financial regulation. It doesn't sound as fancy as the holy grail, but it still signifies its importance in the whole process. So accreditation, it's a program like we've alluded to that's just made up of a minimum of baseline standards that when a state is accredited, it's a certification to other states that they can actually rely on the work. And the impact that it has, really, the process itself is more just for a single state. Every state individually goes through the process, but the ramifications have impacts throughout all of the states. So it is pretty important. We're not saying that the standards are the most challenging or the top of the line, but we're saying if all of these states follow these standards, then hopefully we can properly monitor those companies for financial solvency. So it was, Director Dwyer actually alluded to a lot of the fact of many times the states there would be multiple states in an insurance company, or sometimes there would be nobody looking at an insurance company. And I know when the program started, there were multiple states that actually didn't even have an analysis program. So that's pretty significant to think about, that there was insurance companies filing financial statements and nobody even looked at them. Or it would involve one person coming in and looking at 200 companies for 2 weeks and then leaving again to go out on exams. So one of the things the program actually really did was put into process, some core values, I guess, that all states can follow. One of the things, though, I want to kind of stipulate, we get a lot of grief that, we have to do analysis because accreditation says so. We have to do exams because accreditation says so. And accreditation, though, while we're kind of more that checks and balances, the program itself did not create those standards. Those standards were created by other regulators. within the NEIC. So they're the ones that developed the standards and felt these are the ones that are good enough to bring forward for their accreditation program. And so from there, the reason why we keep it more at a baseline, though, is because we do believe in state-based regulation. So we want that flexibility. So if we have the minimum, that's good. Other states can alter their processes and procedures and have that flexibility to make it their own as well. And that's kind of where the thought process along that is. I don't know if you guys have any additional thoughts on that.
I think from my perspective, when I'm at my legislature or talking to my governor, and I say, the people writing in Rhode Island are solvent, I'm relying on our financial examiners and our financial analysts. And I'm not just relying on them because they're good people. I'm relying on them because I know that they are looking at standards that we all have developed together here at the NEIC. And that gives me comfort that we do have a standard financial, it makes me feel like I'm not going to have solvency problems. One of the reasons for the minimum too is every company is different.
Yeah.
So, we have had a couple of runoff companies in Rhode Island where RBC just doesn't work because it doesn't work if you're not writing premiums. But you need to have the flexibility because simply we were actually talking, so we're competing with the international over here, but there's a capital standard being floated internationally that is a calculation. And I know a lot of you are accountants and finance majors, and calculations are great, but they're not always correct. And one of the things that our system allows you to do is make the calculations, know what the RBC is, and then understand the company. And sometimes your knowledge of that company varies what you would do based on an RBC level. Maybe the RBC level is too high because you know a number of different facts about the company that make you feel they're riskier. Sometimes maybe it's too low. So that's the good part of our system is that the boots on the ground, the financial analysis, the examiners, they know their domestic companies, they know them really, really well. And hopefully they know the facts that allow them to intervene early so that we prevent the insolvencies. That's the whole point. The whole point is let's not have insolvencies. Let's get in there early. And it doesn't mean that we want to liquidate the company. I think the most successful thing is a rehabilitation that brings the company back in a different format or in a different way or addresses whatever the issue is with that company.
We use a lot of acronyms when this is risk-based capital, RBC. So, and if you think of it, it's like every tub sits on its own bottom, right? You have different companies, you have smaller companies, you have the larger ones. Some are don't have a lot of risk out there, and others have tremendous amounts. So having, again, that flexibility. In Kentucky, we have even gone a step further. We have what we call an early warning analyst. And this position came about many years ago when we had a large life insurer, it was back in the 80s, that went under. And successfully rehabilitated, and the book of business then was sold off. But our legislature, even at that point, said we want to have that early flag, waved. So the gentleman that does that is, and we provide reports every year to our legislature just on that issue of the risk that we have in Kentucky, and if any companies are in financial jeopardy or questionable.
Yeah. That's great. So, that's one of the whole points of financial regulation. Again, we can't always prevent the insolvencies, but the idea is if we can identify them early, that's pretty helpful, I think, for even the policyholders. Now, as I mentioned, both of the panelists today are members of the F committee, and I thought it would be really helpful just to kind of provide some transparency, really get a better understanding. As Commissioner Clark alluded to, you're kind of in the spotlight when you're accredited, and you have to sit at this big table all alone in front of all the committee members, and maybe we should add a spotlight. That would be a little bit more interesting too, I don't know. But from the perspective of being a committee member itself, I thought it would be helpful just to try to understand how you guys approach here when you hear the reports from the states, what you're looking for. Are there triggers or things that basically how you approach the states for when they're up for accreditation?
So I mentioned earlier that I started in Rhode Island as general counsel, so I actually didn't go to the F committee meetings. We would send a contingent of people, and I would kind of be the cleanup person, I guess. I would be attending everything but the F committee meetings because everyone else was financial, and they used to tell me that was their favorite meeting, and I was like, wow. And I finally figured out after I was the one attending, they're really talking about your job, and you're hearing from other people in other states that do your job. So it's your favorite meeting because it's really your job, and they're giving you suggestions on what to do and not do, which I think is fascinating. But one of the things that you have to know if you're going to be a member of F committee is it's a lot of work. It is more work than any other committee. You're going to get stacks of reports on all the states that are up for accreditation in that particular quarter. You have to read them all. I would say, you know, luckily we have very good accreditation teams that give you that baseline of, yes, we have, and one thing, and I think most of the people in this room know this, but let me say it for the new people, there's really two different parts to accreditation. One is, do you have the laws and regulations that we all have collectively decided you should have in order to properly monitor your companies? And the second thing is, did you day-to-day do a good job? So the accreditation team is going to come in and he's going to look at examination files. They're going to look at financial analyst files, which will be selected randomly, but they're actually judging. So that's one of the reasons that it's interesting for people who are doing this on the ground, because you actually hear, oh, such and such a state, their analyst didn't do this, or they didn't look at this, or the supervisor didn't do this. So it gives you, oh, well, wait a second, I won't do that next time, right? So, but, you know, it is a very interesting, and then, of course, the poor commissioner has to sit there, as Sharon says, in a huge room with the spotlight on them. And half the time it's like their first meeting, you know, and they're like, what am I doing here? But it's a very interesting meeting, and it is, but you really have to understand when you're signing up for it, it's a lot of work. And are you interested? Do you have the staff? So from my perspective, not being an accountant, I have to have a chief examiner, a chief analyst who are sitting next to me and can give me information on some of the, you know, risk-focused examination principles that I don't do on a day-to-day basis.
And to take that one step further, it's not only the laws and the day-to-day analysis, but they also look at how does the department communicate? Does the commissioner know what's going on? You know, are you having regular meetings with your financial staff? Do you have the documentation to show that you're being told, you're being kept aware? And as Beth said, you know, I have a wonderful team back home. And I think we've got some that have been with the department 25, 30 years. They have an intimate knowledge of our domestic companies. And I have grown from their knowledge and from their experience. But if you all stop and think about it, if every mission statement, I bet if you all go back and look at your website, somewhere in there it's going to say financial solvency, to ensure financial solvency to protect consumers. So when we are looking at this, we're looking at it not just for is the work being done with the companies, is the work being done in order to protect the consumers that are buying those products. So as Beth says, yeah, we have some in-depth calls and experience with it, but it has grown me tremendously as a commissioner just from my participation with it.
And Director Dwyer made a really good point. She relies on her financial solvency staff. I think it's important to note for anything that is a state-specific requirement or a state-specific vote that the F committee has to take, it's only the commissioners that are on the committee are allowed to vote. So they can't even use a proxy to defer to their financial staff. So that's kind of one of the things we have before each of these national meetings. So when all those stacks of papers get sent over to the committee members, we actually have what's called a preview call where we discuss amongst the team leader and then a lot of their commissioners, superintendents, directors, financial solvency staff. They kind of help participate just because they're able to dissect the review team members' report a little bit better and can ask some more in-depth questions so that they can then go to their commissioners and directors and let them know, like, ask them this question, or we may have a problem here, or this state looks good. You know, they can provide them with the feedback based on those calls. I know sometimes the committee members themselves actually do sit on those calls as well, but they're usually always accompanied by their financial solvency staff. So it's very important to have that role for them. And I think another important point is, you know, when the teams are looking at review files of companies for analysis or exams, they're actually not looking at the company itself. We're really looking at the work that the state does to oversee that company. I think sometimes that's a little bit lost. I'll get questions about, oh, well, how is XY company doing? I'm like, we don't look at it from that perspective. We're not really looking at the health of the company. We're looking at how the department evaluates the health of that company. So those are some good points to make, I think. Okay, so challenges. I think it's common for states to feel like they're the only ones that are facing issues. You know, you're kind of out on an island whenever you're on an accreditation review. You're the only one going through it at that time. The issues that you're facing are definitely big issues for your state, but I think it's also kind of important to note that you're probably not alone. A lot of the states, I can tell, at least from going to the states on these reviews, a lot of the states face a lot of the very common, very similar issues. I know, sitting on the committee for several years, I think it's important maybe we should talk about if there's any common issues that come up on the F committee. We're hearing a lot of common themes and how we've been able to at least attempt to address it or at least start the conversation on.
I don't know if it was because of COVID, but it seems like in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been similar challenges for states. And it doesn't matter if it's a large state or a small state. And that is having the necessary staff with the necessary understanding in order to get the job done. I'm thinking of one state in particular. It had a huge growth in number of new domesticated companies. And they had the same staff that they had had for a while. They couldn't quickly get staffing, knowledgeable staff to step up to the plate. So it puts, and there's time frames. There are strict time frames getting this work done, this analysis, and then the yearly analysis done. And, you know, that state, it wasn't a reflection on them. It was just the timing and the circumstances. So the F committee, we're not looking at trying to have a gotcha moment. You know, we want everybody to succeed. And we try to work with those states. And NAIC has been excellent in stepping up and trying to give that training and trying to bring people up. And then the other aspect that we have are states step up, much like when there's a disaster. You know how states will, you know, send other folks to maybe help with those disasters. We do that with the financial if we need to. If we need to have some assistance from other states, or frequently zones will step up and help other states in their zone that might be having some of those challenges. So it's, and again, Beth, I don't know if it was the timing on that, but it's the almost 13 years as I've been a commissioner, it just seemed like all of a sudden it was hitting multiple states at the same time, so.
Yeah, it does. I do recall the same issues earlier too. So I'm really not sure. I think it's probably cyclical. But yeah, so you know, having the right staff, and you know, we have the same challenges as everyone else. When we post a position, we don't hire unless we think that person will be successful. So we don't just hire to hire, right? We've reposted positions multiple times because I think hiring someone that you don't believe is going to be successful isn't good for them or you, right? One of the things, so we had a couple challenges just this year, health challenges that required us to use contractors. And so a theme that I'm seeing emerging with some states is the use of contractors. And does the state, there's nothing wrong with using a contractor, but the state needs to control the process and understand what's happening with the company. So, you know, we had a couple people in our financial analysts group that were out for very legitimate reasons, but those companies, we still had to get things done by a certain time, right? So there was no way to do it other than to use a contractor. But we made sure that the more junior people were involved in the analysis, that they understood what the contractor was doing, that when the people returned, that they understood and they were able to, because otherwise you lose the continuity with the company. And I've heard recently, and I don't know if this is true or not, because, industry sometimes comes to you with issues that don't really exist, but I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, I have heard, well, are we going to see contractors just out of control? Contractors just doing the job with the state not knowing what they're doing. And that would be a very bad thing for the accreditation program. You've got to have people on staff that understand the companies, that are directing the work that's being done. And I really hope that doesn't become an issue. We've heard it in a couple of accreditation reviews. And I think everybody, if it's brought to your attention, you'll make sure you have the right people on staff or do everything you can to do that. So I hope that's an issue, a solved issue going forward.
Yeah, I know recently we absolutely, I think the rise of, the whole pandemic definitely put a lot of strain on departments. Staff definitely left. Staffing was definitely, I think, probably the most common concern we hear at every single state, whether it's through retirements or they just can't hire the staff or a combination of both. And, I would say most of the states that we go to, their desire is to eventually have their own staff doing the work. A lot of states, I think, believe that's just the better model for them. But again, the use of contractors is definitely on the rise, and as Director Dwyer said, there is definitely nothing wrong with it. It's definitely something that is needed. But the value of making sure the state itself understands what the contractors are going through, what they're doing, so you can understand those companies is definitely a key thing that I think the F Committee is starting to make sure is happening. I think we have a couple of exposures actually out to just kind of break down some of those numbers, and something we're definitely looking at. And another thing I think is important, the communication with your other regulators, especially if you're sitting in on those F Committee meetings and you hear, oh my gosh, this state has a very similar process to what we do and they're experiencing the same troubles, reaching out and building those bridges with your fellow regulators just to try to maybe brainstorm and see how other states are handling it, how they're addressing it, just opening that line of communication, because it's always beneficial when you've got other people that are going through the same struggles that you're going through.
Well, I'm going to make a clarification. I guess Kentucky is kind of in a unique situation. I have contractors, but they are state-specific contractors. They only work for Kentucky. And when I say, some of them have been there 25 and 30 years. But what we have instigated is we started out with some intern programs trying to grow our own reserves here. But we've also now have created positions that are like examiner in training and analyst in training, so that we are giving them that experience, and they're working with my chief, who has been there for 28 years, and I know he's not going to want to stay there, for 15 more. So we're trying to grow that from within. And, and I'm really proud. We've got 4 now, and 3 of them are Kentucky residents there. Oh, wow. So it's a process that's been working well for us. And maybe they don't have that initial training that you would be looking at, but they're newly CPAs or newly graduates or whatever, and we've got that program started there.
Yeah.
And I've learned, because of my dealings with the F Committee, about the staffing challenges, and I better do something back home.
Yeah, states are definitely getting creative too. Just, it's challenging when you're already short-staffed and then you have to bring on new staff to provide on-the-job training, because ultimately that's always the best type of training, and how do they do that? And so it's interesting just to hear how states are trying to address those issues and get again, just really open those lines of communication, because it is something that we've definitely noticed a big spike in over the past, I'd say, 2 or 3 years for sure. So moving forward then, the value added. So being accredited, obviously, I think a lot of people would agree it is important, and again, it's not just for one single state, but it has impacts for pretty much all of the states when others are accredited. So as much as, a lot of us sometimes will say or maybe want it to be just a rubber stamp. It's actually not a rubber stamp. There is a whole process that we all go through. Every state that's accredited that goes through it, demonstrating to a team of individual industry experts that they are in compliance. It's a lot of work for a state to be accredited, not just leading up to and during the week, but during the interim 5 years, because you're accredited for every 5 years, there's a lot of work that goes in. It's, also just being an F committee meeting member, it's a lot of work, but also just maintaining that accreditation is a work. Is there any benefit, do you feel, for your states or for other states just to even be accredited?
I think there is. I think, first of all, being accredited gives you a common language among all the states. So when you're coming in as a new analyst or examiner, you have, the statutory accounting, the financial analyst workbook, the financialist. These are all things developed by other people in other states through the NAIC that really, it's a guidebook for what your job's going to be. And I think that's a great thing for a new employee. They are able to, this is not easy stuff. It takes a lot of years to really understand what you're doing. But those are great things that gives you something right out of the box. You have your standards, you're applying those standards, you're applying it no matter whether you're in California or Rhode Island, it's the same standard. And I think that makes it a little easier to get on board. As I'm looking at all of these people, and, I came to the insurance summit right after COVID when there was, maybe 20 people in the room or something. But one of the big benefits, and I think the pandemic has shown us this, is of an in-person meeting like this, is you all get to talk to your contemporaries in other states. And it is much easier to contact somebody with a similar company or ask if you've met them, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we can go on a virtual, and there's a lot of great things for virtual too to train us, but an in-person meeting, you get to hear from other people in other states that I guarantee you are facing issues that you're facing. So I think that's a real value to being accredited and being part of the NAIC system.
And I look at it as kind of the proof in the pudding. We advocate every day for state-based regulation. We know what we're doing. Well, how are we going to prove it? We prove it by meeting those standards and by being a industry and being a body of regulators across this country that, yes, we are meeting the standards, and it's the proof that we can shine up for everyone.
Yeah. Does anyone have questions at the moment? At all? Feel free if you do, raise your hand, come up, or any of that. I think we're doing very good on time. So before I'm kind of close to the end, but I wanted to first definitely thank Director Dwyer and Commissioner Clark for their expertise. As I've said, I've worked with them pretty much almost the entire time I've been with the accreditation program. I think Commissioner Clark was one of the first states I went to individually as a team observer, so I always remember that whole process, and it's just, certain things are always, and I love Rhode Island, so. But I thought, it'd be good just to get some parting thoughts from them, what are the key things that you hope that this audience at least takes away from today, or, things that we can do, if they are experiencing trouble, is there something that the states can come back to the F committee and ask for help with? Because I think a lot of times they think the F committee just only does accreditations of states, but we actually do try to help and make that point contact as well.
So I've actually seen, I'm recalling maybe over a decade ago, but there was one state that just couldn't do financial analysis. They had lost pretty much their entire team. And another state actually stepped up and did it for them, which I found to be very unusual, and I don't know that would happen today. I don't know anyone that would have the capability. But that's the kind of interplay that the states have with this. We are very interested because we're all relying on each other. We have 29 domestics in Rhode Island, which is a lot for a small state. We have some significant domestics. But that is not a majority of our market in any, I think one of our domestics has a good slice of our auto and homeowners market, but I've got another 40 companies. So I am relying very heavily on all of you to make sure that those 40 companies are solvent and should be writing in my state. So that's something to remember, that it's not just, you're not just doing your job. There are people all over the country relying on what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. I think the accreditation program, again, as Sharon has mentioned a couple times, focuses all of us on the importance of solvency. We're all very big on consumer protection, but if there's no company there, there's no consumer protection, right? Yeah. The consumer purchased the right to receive a payment on the happening of certain contingencies in the future. And if when those contingencies happen, there's no one there to pay it, I'm not sure what we've done on consumer protection. And honestly, the entire insolvencies affect the whole system, right? So yeah. The guarantee fund, as many of you know, is, the assessments are the money paid to consumers is assessed from the rest of the industry. That doesn't make for a healthy industry if we've got a lot of insolvencies. So it's just such an important program and such important work that sometimes you don't realize on a day-to-day basis when you're sitting in your desk looking at a spreadsheet. But we're all relying on you, so not to put heavy pressure on anyone, but I've just done it. So.
Well, I'd follow up. I dare say that there's a lot of you here that do not work in that financial area back at, in your department. But again, the financial people, the divisions, even within a department, depend upon each other. If I hear from our consumer protection division that maybe claims are being very slow in getting paid, that might be a first little indication to our financial people, okay, we need to look at their reserves, see what's going on. So no matter what your role is back at the department, we are all interdependent upon each other on a day-to-day job and in our missions of maintaining financial solvency and protecting consumers. And let me just say that you all don't hear it often, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for all the work you do, because you are helping my consumers back in Kentucky, whether you know it or not, or you don't think about it. The work that the 11,000 regulators do, we are all working for the benefit of the entire citizenry. So thank you for the work you do.
I think that's absolutely an excellent point to make. It's actually part of the reason why I sometimes broke down and cried in front of people. It's just the passion of it all. I often say I think your job as a regulator is probably one of the, it can be a thankless job, but it's an extremely important job. The people that hold policies, whether it's life, whether it's auto, home, any of that, they don't really know what you're doing. They don't really know that you're there protecting them, but that's exactly what it is that we're doing. And I think, it's important to, we've had states, as Director Dreyer had said, that have come to the F committee before and said, look, we had, these problems that come up, we're not going to be able to make timeliness. And it's helpful if they let us know as soon as they know versus let us finding out when their intermanual review or their full review comes up and we're like, oh, wow, you guys didn't do any analysis last year. That becomes a little bit bigger of an issue, and it's hard to kind of dig yourself out of that hole. But if you come to us, to the F committee, early or as soon as you know that there could potentially be a problem and let the F committee know, that doesn't mean that there's going to be action taken. I don't think the committee is quick. They take action when it's necessary. I think that's appropriate to say. But at first signs of trouble, I think the first step is trying to help a state. I don't know, do you guys have any additional thoughts, especially regarding the whole steps and actions?
Yeah, I think people hear, we're going to lose our accreditation. So that's the last step, by the way. There's a bunch of steps. And if you read the accreditation rules, there's multiple levels if a state is in trouble is the wrong, but if a state is seeing challenges, the first level is probation, and that is confidential at the committee level, the F committee level. And that's really, something's happened. Either we found it through the examination or you've reported it. And it's a challenge to whether or not other states can rely on you. And so you might go on probation and other states would work with you, or you'd figure out a plan to get off of probation. If that doesn't work, there's another step, which name is going to escape me at the moment.
I think that would be probation suspension.
Suspension, yes. So suspension is public, but that is only because after we've done, well, I shouldn't say that, because I guess there could be a catastrophic failure that we might go right to suspension or a revocation, but I have never been involved in one of those, that you just jumped, and so then you might have suspension, and only then would you get to revocation. Now, if there is a revocation of accreditation, it means the other states can't rely on you. So that's the point. It's not, to be critical, to be whatever. It's that the other states can't rely on you, and we can't be sure that your domestic insurance companies are solvent enough to write insurance for our consumers. And that's so what does it mean if you don't have accreditation? What it means is your domestic companies are subject to exam and analysis by 50-something states.
Yeah.
Inefficient, right? If we were all doing it just like in the 80s, not very efficient, not targeting the right people, costly, and that all kind of goes through, the expenses of an insurance company go into rates, so it affects the rates. Not an ideal, but not, the companies still get to operate, right? So if there's a very solvent company in the domestic state that has lost their accreditation, they can still operate if they are, if individual states will make decisions, they'll do exams, they'll do analysis, but they can still operate. But all of these things, I don't know how we could possibly do national state-based regulation without accreditation. I just think we would be all over the place, right? We would just be, you'd probably be looking at who has market share and sending an examiner in, but there's 17, for some of the larger companies who have huge market shares, they'd have everybody in there all the time, right?
Yeah.
The costs of that would all go into premiums. We're trying to keep premiums low. So there's a lot of value to accreditation that people don't understand on a, when you first think about it, but it's very, very valuable in the big picture.
I know Commissioner Clark also mentioned getting information from other areas if you're not in the financial sector. The importance of, you might get an email sometimes once a year, sometimes before an exam saying, hey, do you have any information on this company? Okay, thanks, bye. But it is important for us to really get information from those different areas because, as she alluded to, it could signify that there might be some financial concerns or things just to look into. So it's helpful to get information from all of the areas within the department, whether it's rates and forms, legal, taxes, all the other areas, marketing. So that's always something very important to just make sure that you're providing that input because it is all part, again, we're all working toward the same goal of ensuring that the policyholders are protected. And I thought I had another point to make, but maybe I don't.
Well, I have something jumping off what you just said is one of the things that we do in Rhode Island that was started by, I think, our last chief examiner who was stolen by the state of Connecticut. And yes, I am bitter, in case everyone.
We can name names if
I can
you'd
name
like.
names, yeah. But anyway, we send around a memo or an email to everyone. And I know this because I get them. Right, so it says, hey, we're starting an exam of such and such a company. Do you know anything? Is there anything you should? And occasionally I've sent something that really no one else would know, like it might have something to do with the FAIR plan or who knows. But that's you're casting a wide net. Now I probably, if I talk to people who are doing examination analysis, I bet they don't get everybody coming back saying, yeah, this is it. But at least you're looking to see what the issues are out there. And to and I don't think that coordination existed when I started.
Yeah.
I think that's the accreditation teams have been pushing that cooperation within departments because I think it makes for a better product for all of us.
Yeah. I think it was interesting when I first started in accreditation, I noticed the states were all very siloed. I don't know, you guys might even recall this, but we used to give what was called scores. So every section was given a score, whether it was analysis or exams. And then it became, okay, what score did analysis get? What score did exams get? Who's better? And it really created a divide. And then we stopped giving the scores, but then they would look at the management letter comments that we would give. And well, analysis got 2, we only got 1, so exams is better. But I think over the past, we recently, not recent, I guess it's been since 2012, we revamped the accreditation program. And we kind of broke down those walls, I think. I think a lot of times the departments overall feel a lot more cohesive. There's a lot more involvement from the senior level staff, including, just how they communicate and get the information. And so we really hope, when you're at a state or when you're working with your states, you realize that, you all are working together. Even if you feel so individual, like my job is this, but it really does play a bigger picture in the whole piece of the puzzle, really. So I don't know if there's any other thoughts or any questions, but we are about out of time. Is there a question in the back? Perfect. Yes.
Yeah, I think we all do things like that, right? So if someone, gave us a bad grade on something, we're always focused on it. But yeah, it does evolve. And something that 10 years ago was put into an accreditation report might not even have applicability. So just like we do with the statutory accounting and all of the standards, those are constantly being worked at. If any of you go to the statutory accounting working group, they are talking about these very narrow accounting standards in a lot of detail. That's because, over time you find that, maybe that accounting standard doesn't really work for this anymore. We've got to revisit it. So it's a constant process. It's not stagnant. What you said of why do we do it? Because it's in a report. Well, I think you should be always looking at why you do it. And if you're doing it because it was in a report 10 years ago, you have to figure out, does it really even need to be done? And if the accreditation team says to you, hey, why did you stop doing this that we mentioned 10 years ago? If you have the appropriate analysis for why you stopped doing it, I can't imagine, that is the kind of thing that's reported to the committee. Hey, they stopped doing this, and this is why. And rarely is that criticized. That's more of a, oh, good, you're looking at the whole process and you're understanding what you're doing overall as opposed to checking boxes.
And the world is evolving. During my first tenure, when we were looking at a company, and we have a domestic that is owned by private equity, we never had to look at affiliated and non-affiliated transactions and looking at a organizational chart that would take up one of these tables. So a lot of our work as it evolves, the issues sometimes first come to our E committee, our financial condition committee. And that is where those subject matter experts are. And they will then make recommendations to the F committee on considerations about including this as standards or as a part of the review. So it has to evolve, and a lot of it has to do just evolving with the type of ownership or how the companies, the new developments with companies.
Yeah, those are great points. And additionally, one of the things, the F committee kind of has a volunteer group. It's not really tied to any of the membership of F committee. So any state is definitely free to participate on it. But we're constantly looking over the manual, making sure what we're doing still makes sense for us to do. We also kind of get, like Commissioner Clark said, get feedback from the E committee as the process evolves. Do they send that referral back over to us to make sure it's implemented, or, is it relevant enough to include an accreditation? And then I will also say lastly, because we definitely hear on the reviews, well, accreditation told us to do this. And it may not really have been accreditation. It may have been possibly a team member asking a question, and then it was misinterpreted that said we have to do this because they asked this question. If you ever hear that from anybody in your state that says we have to do this because accreditation said so, and if you can't directly point to it to a manual, I strongly encourage you to send myself or Bailey Henning an email, and we will confirm or deny or provide more information as to whether or not it really and truly is something that's required for accreditation. But we're certainly definitely open for any questions that you may have. Please feel free to contact us. I think we're very open and we try to respond as quickly as we can. And with that, we're at time. So thank you guys so much.